Welcome, everybody, to the Super Wildcard Weekend Recap, recapping all the games. We also had MLK, and he had a dream. His dream, the Detroit Lions, reaching prosperity for the first time in 32 years. He had a dream. He said, the Dolphins, you guys are a nightmare, along with the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles. We're here to break this all down, talk about the Texans win, prevailing against our Cleveland Browns, the Chiefs moving on, and all the storylines that permit over the last week here, recapping Super Wildcard Weekend.
Yeah, we're here to go over everything in Super Wildcard Weekend. And as MLK said, he had a dream that the Brickyard could predict every single NFC first round matchup. Not only tell you in advance 2 months who is going to be facing each other and who are going to win every single one of those games. Yes, including calling the Dallas Cowboys being upset by the Green Bay Packers. Not only that, predicting that the Philadelphia Eagles would fall to the wild card position and none other than Baker Money Mayfield would end their chances. Not only that, but predicting that Jared Goff would face off against the Los Angeles Rams in round 1 of the wild card weekend. And that would be the best game of the week, coming out to 1.1 score and ending with a Jared Goff kneel down. Not only did we predict that, but you got every single pick right this week.
Bang, bang.
I picked the Cleveland Browns versus the Houston Texans, but he is the Texans whisperer. I should have known. Never go against the Texans whisperer on this show. And then we picked the Steelers to cover the spread. However, we did think that there was going to be, 3 feet of snow, not just 1, not just 2, but 3 feet of snow, but they ended up moving that game on us, and us just picking the Steelers against the Bills to cover the spread in that game was not a wrong pick. We just motivated the Buffalo Bills to win that game.
Damn right.
So together we are undefeated. I missed 1 game this week. You didn't miss any games this week. We got every single game right. So when you come here, tell us we don't know what we're talking about when we get every single thing right 2 months ago. And then also a little bit 2 months ago as well. If you look at some of our videos, I was like, Cowboys lose disappointingly, which we predicted, obviously, to the Green Bay Packers. And then Bill Belichick going to the Dallas Cowboys. We were the first sports show on the internet to utter the statement that Bill Belichick could go to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, what is every single media outlet doing saying that the Dallas Cowboys need to go out there and get Bill Belichick? Hurts to be right so often.
It hurts to be right so often, as we often are. Texans whisperers here, along with just the NFL.
Get real quiet.
Get real quiet here. The 8 ball is in front of us here. You can't see it because it's off camera. It's moving here. I said, beginning of last year, I said the Texans are going to screw up the first overall pick. What did they do? They won the last week of the season. I said they're going to take Will Anderson with their pick. What did they do? They took Will Anderson. I said they're going to take CJ Stroud, make us proud. CJ Stroud. They take CJ Stroud. And then going into the playoffs, I said, you know what? This CJ Stroud kid, he's a top 5 quarterback in this league. No doubt about it. He's going to go and beat the Browns, albeit the Browns are a better team, but CJ Stroud is a better man, and he came out victorious, and he had a perfect game against none other than the dog pound Cleveland Browns, coming out looking immaculate. 274, 16 of 21, 3 touchdowns, near perfect QBR. This game was electric to watch. Nico Collins had a day. Noah Brown got it done. And the Texans are now facing the Ravens in the second round.
Yeah, the Texans are now facing the Ravens in the first round, and what a turnaround for this team. And we were talking about before this game, and even leading into it, how tough it really is to blow out a team and then get right up a few weeks later to play that team. I know they didn't have CJ Stroud in that game, but if you're still the Cleveland Browns, you're like, we just blew this team out. You start the game out pretty hot there, and then without CJ Stroud, on the Texans. The Texans were like, okay, we have all the adjustments we need to make. Cleveland really didn't have a strong game plan defensively because they don't have a 1,000-yard rusher for the Houston Texans, although Devin Singletary has been pretty good this year. Dalton Schultz was cut from the Dallas Cowboys for a reason, and Jake Ferguson looks like he's panning out for the Dallas Cowboys this year as well. Tank Dell was hurt. He's out in this game, and then we end up getting Bobby Trees back for this game, which was a good boost for them. But still, it's that 6'4" Nico Collins and then CJ Stroud did everything he needed to do in the first half, and then when it came to the second half, it just felt like when you were watching like the Warriors when they're in their heyday go on a run, where you just see a team that looks like they're getting overwhelmed. Everything was Houston Texans. The fans were fired up in that game, and then that defense picking off Joe Flacco 2 times. I mean, the chosen one. I mean, going into this game, Joe Flacco was pretty much like Kid Rock for the Cleveland Browns. He was going out there. He was a superstar. If you want to compare him to Kid Rock, or you want to compare him to someone like Leonard Skinner, he was that kind of figure for the Cleveland Browns. And then he showed up to Houston, and then you're like, wait, I thought we were going to a Leonard Skinner show. I thought we were going to see Kid Rock. But no, Riff Raff showed up. And Riff Raff came out on stage here. He's on Sway in the Morning, not knowing if it's handshakes, hugs, not knowing if it's Saturday or Ruby Tuesday on a Monday, like when Riff Raff was on Sway in the Morning. So when you get that Joe Flacco, who we had high expectations for, who had not lost a wild card game, and you saw both of these head coaches, Kevin Stefanski, your specialty is offense. Well, your offense didn't show up in this game. Partly is on Joe Flacco, but partly is on still Kevin Stefanski. But with D'Amico Ryans, his game plan was in full effect. They had a game plan for the Cleveland Browns. They fixed all of their mistakes, and now this is looking like a Super Bowl caliber defense that will be able to keep them in a game against the Baltimore Ravens team. And then CJ Stroud didn't even have to do anything in the second half. He threw for like 250 in the first half, and then he ended up ending with 273.
Yeah, ended up being about 20 yards in the second half, and the game plan for them against the Browns was if we can contain Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford, that's kind of their bread and butter for them. Run the ball, and then when it matters, take some deep shots with Joe Flacco. The Texans knew that from that tape against the Browns just a few weeks ago when they annihilated them. They took it on the ground, and they knew kind of what their game plan was, how they could counteract it in this game. And they had a great game plan. I give credit to D'Amico Ryans for readjusting their game plan because last time around was a blowout. They came back with the vengeance at home in the playoffs, and they knew how to attack them this time around. So stopped the run, didn't get much on the ground with Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt. And then when it came time for the air play, we had players like Derek Stingley step in. We had John Petrie step in. He had a great game. And Will Anderson, even on a bad foot, was doing just everything he could to humiliate Joe Flacco. And it's unfortunate with the Browns because although I was hesitant to take the Texans in this game because I knew on paper Browns have a better defense, Browns have a better O-line. But at the end of the day, the Texans stepped up, elevated their game to a level we haven't quite seen them reach in a long time. And Joe Flacco, the story here was we were wanting or hoping, maybe optimistically wishing for a Nick Foles level run with them because of the story, stepping in week 13, playing this insane. Linsanity isn't even fair. This was a Flackenheimer run that we saw where he was absolutely electric. Unfortunately, as with every other backup quarterback this year, coming to a fault right around that 5th or 6th game, coming back down to earth and playing back to where he was normally at the last couple of years, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we said that before this game. We were like, look at all of these backup quarterbacks who go out there. Josh Dobbs initially succeeds, and then once you get to like week 4, 5, and 6, then that's when they start to fall off there. We've seen it with a few other quarterbacks where they have some initial success and then start to fade away into oblivion, and usually the better quarterbacks are the ones that are struggling out of the gate first, and then they find a way to figure it out, put it together, especially with someone like Joe Flacco. And Joe Flacco just looked old in this game. They looked overwhelmed. But at the same time, the Cleveland Browns still had the #1 total defense this year. You want to talk about an all-time choke job, not just on offense, but for the defense, Myles Garrett. We've been talking about Myles Garrett all regular season, and you know who the best players in the league are by the players who actually show up and create pressure, but he was nowhere to be found in this game. You're someone who's supposed to be arguing your case on why you're better than TJ Watt, and TJ Watt ended up leading the league in sacks this year. Myles Garrett looked like an MVP candidate at some points this year. However, when the big moments arose and he needed to get pressure to CJ Stroud, he was nowhere to be found. And Laramie Tunsil is the best offensive lineman in this game today. On the Houston Texans side of the ball, but the other pieces on their offensive line, it's not like they have one of the best offensive lines in the league. So you're someone who needs to be a difference maker and a game changer. And we see that with Aaron Donald being able to go out there and make a play. We've seen TJ Watt make some pretty spectacular plays in the playoffs, even when they were playing the Chiefs in that one game. He opened the game at least with getting a strip sack and returning it for a touchdown on Patrick Mahomes. And that's one of the best offensive lines in the league. And Myles Garrett, you can't call yourself the best defensive player in the league and not show up. You can't be a no-show in a game like this, especially when you're arguing this is the best total overall defense.
Yeah, no, this is one of the best statistical defenses of the decade. We saw them week in and week out hold these teams, mitigate their offenses, and then ultimately when it matters most, when it's a winner go home situation, Myles Garrett, when we're talking about the best players in the league, what do we talk about often? What can they do in the playoffs in the big moments? We saw with CJ Stroud the last 2 weeks have 2 perfect games, basically. We see Patrick Mahomes count in week in and week out do that in the playoffs. We see Josh Allen. We see all these other stars elevate their games in the playoffs. And when we're talking about the best edge rushers in the game, when we're talking about top defensive players, we know TJ Watt, what he's capable of. We saw how much the Steelers missed him in this past game. And for Myles Garrett, it's going to hurt him as far as where we rank him going into next season, just based on when it matters most, is he there to deliver? In this game, unfortunately, he didn't deliver.
Yeah, and it's like, are you there to deliver? So you're Myles Garrett. You've been in the league some time now. Well, you look on the flip side, Aiden Hutchinson, it's his first playoff appearance. What does he do? He pressures on 33% of the plays. He had 27 pressures and 2 sacks. Myles Garrett was nowhere to be found in this game. And I get most of the blame does rely on Joe Flacco, and both those interceptions really killed them so far. And that's just what you get with the Flacco experiment here. But that's also when you're like, we've struggled for so many years at quarterback. You know what we should do? We should bring in a serial predator to our organization and give him the most guaranteed money of all time after he sits out for an entire year. And then we're going to go up against the franchise that we traded him and we took off of his hands after all of these allegations. And they are laughing at you right now. The Houston Texans are overjoyed. Like, can you believe what they gave us for Deshaun Watson and how screwed they are in their salary cap because of Deshaun Watson, giving him the most guaranteed money of all time? And he didn't play last year because he was partly suspended. Then he ended up getting injured again. Then he was banged up all year this year, and it looks like he lost most of his arm strength. And the Houston Texans are like, wow, you really took a guy with this many allegations. I believe it totaled up to around 64 allegations against Deshaun Watson. And like, you think that's going to boost your morale? Like, usually when you win a Super Bowl, it's because the locker room, the vibe, and the culture you create. Like, and then you're telling me you want to fix that and bring a championship to Cleveland with Deshaun Watson, and now you have to bring in someone like Joe Flacco. And there's a reason why you had 4 different quarterbacks this year, and Kevin Stefanski weathered the storm, but there's only so much your head coach can do to fix the offense and take the pressure off of the quarterback when you give him a lame duck, XFL MVP, DTR needs CPR, and then a senior citizen.
Yeah, and that's ultimately we're going to talk a lot this episode about the teams that came from the ruins of the bottom of the NFL, whether it's the Texans, who were 3-13 the last 3 years prior to CJ Stroud coming in. What did they change to change their fortunes? Whether it's the Detroit Lions, who at one point were 0-16 just 15 years ago, what they did to overcome that.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the Packers moving on from a Hall of Fame quarterback and finding their guy, having faith in Jordan Love and how he improved. Changing the fortunes of certain teams in the playoffs who are still in the mix at this point. What did they do to right their wrongs?
Right.
What the Browns did was they never really had a star quarterback. They had Baker Mayfield, who was probably their best quarterback before. They move on from Baker Mayfield, send him to the black hole of the NFL, to the Panthers. And then obviously he bounces around, goes to Tampa Bay, he prevails. But moving on from him to sign a predatorial rapist who had the most allegations, who at one point the NFL was teasing suspending indefinitely. You're like, that's like
Allegedly. I'll preface with allegedly. It was
allegedly, sure, whatever. But that was your move to make yourself go over the top. And on paper, even then, we had doubts with it. Well, this guy has been accused allegedly 26 times. He could be facing a year-long suspension. And this is a Browns franchise who has been perpetual losers over the last 40 years. That's whether it's the team moving away from you to go to Baltimore. We see how good the Ravens are now. Whether it's firing Bill Belichick, whether it's, drafting the Brandon Whedons or the Brady Quinns or the Tim Couches of the world, Johnny Manziels, the list goes on. It's been perpetual failure for this franchise, and their way that they tried to overcome that was signing a predatorial rapist, allegedly, to the biggest contract in NFL history. He wasn't there for the playoffs. He hasn't been there at all. He's been taking trips to God only knows where.
Yeah.
And this is
Taiwan.
ultimately, I hate to say it, for a team that I was rooting for all year, this is what you deserve at the end of the day for how you've gone about it. So Browns, they kind of ultimately, great effort, great season. I like the Browns overall, but this was just, I don't know, this is going to go down as an all-time dud.
And so, like, with all of these teams, do you see, like, in the AFC North, do you see the Browns taking the biggest step back just with where they are salary cap wise? And then they probably won't be able to afford to bring most of these receivers back. Currently, they're negative 13 million. You have the 27th rank salary cap heading into next offseason here. It's not getting any better from here. So unless Deshaun Watson turns back into Michael Jordan, which you shouldn't be relying on at this point, because if he tells you in back-to-back years that I'm not going to have any arm strength, how long is it going to take him to actually get back in the flow of the game? Or is he just going to be perpetually hurt here? It's like this could go down as one of the worst trades of all time. When you look at someone like CJ Stroud, who is 22 years old, everyone finally caught up to him being the most valuable player in the league, being one of the best quarterbacks not named Patrick Mahomes in the NFL, where he was able to take a team where we didn't think he had any weapons. We didn't think he had a very good offensive line outside of Laramie Tunsil. We didn't think that defense was going to make the massive change that it did this year. And now, when you talk about MVP here, the Cleveland Browns are looking at someone like CJ Stroud. I get that someone like Dak Prescott has really good numbers. I get Lamar Jackson has some nice numbers. But you want to talk about the definition of valuable? Stats are not as valuable as changing an entire franchise who wasn't even supposed to be in the playoffs this year, wasn't even on the spectrum of anyone getting to the playoffs or winning a game. We had them at 8-9, want them to put them in the playoffs, but we thought the AFC was too stacked for them to make it. But then CJ Stroud ends up flipping that 8-9 to a 9-8 here, getting into the playoffs. And then we're of the opinion that the definition of valuable, put any other player in there besides CJ Stroud, and how much are they actually going to turn around that situation? And you can even have the same conversation about Coach of the Year, because Kevin Stefanski was on there when Dan Campbell wasn't. He was also on there when DeMeco Ryans wasn't even up for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, and ultimately this is what it comes down to at the end of the day is CJ Stroud, a situation like the Texans, and we've talked about this at length. You can check out our other episodes where whether it's a Dak Prescott or a Brock Purdy or really any outside of maybe 4 quarterbacks you can mention in the NFL who they go into that situation, they're either not turning around the franchise or they're not having this level of success that they've had. Winning a playoff game, first time in the post Deshaun Watson era, or DeMeco Ryans, just talking about a head coach. How hard is it to go into an organization and succeed alone? Never mind completely flipping the script. They were 6.5. Their wins to start the season was 6.5.
Yeah.
So you picked the over here. We picked the over when we did the preview. But to turn things around so quickly and have this level of success, there's only really one team that I can think of that did this in recent years, and that was with the Bengals in 2021. We saw how successful they were.
Yeah.
Joe Burrow comes in. Obviously, he was banged up the first year. He comes back. They get Jamar Chase, Zach Taylor, another year in the system, and they turn into juggernauts of the AFC after that.
Yeah, they turn into juggernauts in the AFC after that, and then the Texans are still top 5 in salary cap flexibility next year. So if you think this is just gonna be a one and done team, it's like they're not even supposed to be here. They have Will Anderson, who's now one of the best defensive players in the league. If you look at his stats, he's up there with TJ Watt, Micah Parsons, and Myles Garrett in most of the categories when it comes to pressure rate and percentage of times that he's pressured the quarterback. And then you look at someone like CJ Stroud, it's like this guy is just keeps winning. This was a game where the Browns should have beat them. The Browns were favorites on the road, and you picked the underdog in this game. I thought the Browns should have won this game because I thought the Cleveland Browns are the better team. You could make an argument that the Indianapolis Colts were the better team in that situation where you have a Shane Steichen-led offense. You have Jonathan Taylor, Zach Moss, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, and then all you had was basically CJ Stroud and Nico Collins in that matchup. And then the Colts have good players on defense as well. So maybe your defense was better, but the Colts were at home in that game. He goes to Indianapolis and wins, and then he ends up winning your division. So at this point, it's like, okay, if the game is close and the ball is in his hands right now, and you use the third down and long test, where how confident are you that your quarterback's going to get a third down and long? Dak, not very confident. Brock Purdy, not very confident at all. Josh Allen, pretty confident. Patrick Mahomes, definitely going to get it. Lamar Jackson could break off a run, and then CJ Stroud is another guy where if it's third and long, you're not really worried if it's going to get it or not. Now you're expecting him to make those big plays in the games here, and there's still no pressure on this Texans team because they're not supposed to be here.
Yeah, and they're dangerous going into the rest of the playoffs because we have our questions with the Bills. They had a good win this last week, but questions with the Bills. We have questions with the Chiefs receiver core. Are they capable? Travis Kelce looking a lot older than he did last year. And then we have the Ravens. If they beat the Ravens here, how confident are you in the Texans making the Super Bowl?
Oh, they will. It's a lock. If they beat the Baltimore Ravens, the Ravens have the best defense left in football. Especially after the Cleveland Browns went down, you have the best safety in the league in Kyle Hamilton. He is 6'6" there, so he's going to be trailing Nico Collins. He's also one of the best blitzing safeties in the league. You probably have two of the best linebackers in the league, outside of Trey Greenlaw and Fred Warner there, but with Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, it's right up there. And then you have all of the big defensive linemen like Metabike in the middle there, and then you still have Marlon Humphrey on the outside. So with all of that, the Baltimore Ravens, he just took out the Cleveland Browns, who had the best defense in the league, and now you're going into a cold weather environment against the Lamar Jackson team, who has been off for 2 weeks. So is there a chance they can come out flat? Definitely, and I saw them come out flat when they played the Tennessee Titans here. So I think defensively, the Houston Texans defense will be able to keep them in any game. So if they are able to do enough offensively to surpass the Ravens, then I have no doubt that they would be able to interrupt a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes in a run, because I feel like both of those teams are undermanned compared to the Baltimore Ravens. And at that point, it's going to be like you mentioned, a Bengals type run to the Super Bowl where you have a CJ Stroud on the level of someone like a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen. And then you have a defense and a defensive minded head coach who can scheme to shut down a great run game, like someone like Kevin Stefanski or Shane Steichen.
Yeah, exactly. And they do have a good, obviously they have D'Amico Ryans, similar to the Bengals. They had Lou Anarumo and how successful they were. So I definitely think it's possible. If it really comes down to this Ravens game, they win this Ravens game, they're a lock for the Super Bowl. And I think that they'll definitely put up a test for them. Right now, Vegas has them as +10 in this game. So the Ravens are obviously heavy favorites, and they have a right to be, being the number one team in the league. But
Yeah.
definitely confident in the Texans here. But believe it or not, we did have other football games as well. This was this was an exciting game.
Yeah.
Actually, we had other games this same day as well on Saturday. We
Yeah.
had it was kind of a game.
Was it a game?
Chiefs versus Dolphins. And this was one of the most obvious games for us when we predicted it. We're like, okay, cold weather. The Dolphins are 0-11 in games below 40 degrees since 2017. The Dolphins also have the longest losing streak in the NFL currently. And Tua can't beat a winning team, or really anybody on the Dolphins can't beat a winning team.
Unless it's the Cowboys.
Yeah, we'll talk about them very extensively later on. So with not beating a winning team, with it being super cold, and with Tua being limited, the obvious happened there. Chiefs took care of business 26-7, mustered up 7 measly points against the Kansas City Chiefs defense. You take out that one 52-yard touchdown from Tyreek Hill,
Yeah.
and they're basically shut out at that point.
Yeah, you take out that one play from Tyreek Hill, and they're basically shut out at that point. And that's what we've been saying all season long. As much as Tyreek Hill can go out there and say, I am not the MVP on our team, we already have a MVP, and his name is Tua. Like, that is simply just not the case. And you're going to have to go into Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Kansas City for the foreseeable future if you want to go through and win the championship. And then when you had the chance to have home field advantage, when you had a chance to actually, beat the Buffalo Bills in Miami, so you don't have to go to Kansas City, and you had a chance to snap that losing streak to winning teams, unless it's the Dallas Cowboys, who didn't play any winning team, so you can barely classify them as a winning team this year. You didn't do that. And as soon as Tyreek Hill was off the field, Tua threw an interception in that game. And then the Dolphins in this game just did not look like they wanted to be there. And like, did you not know this was a playoff game? Did you not get the memo that you're going to Kansas City? It's going to be freezing cold for them as well. Just because you live there, just because we live in the cold, just because we're in New England, doesn't mean we want to be outside in the cold. And this is something where it's like, you have speed on your team. You should have a run game, because I keep hearing about this Miami Dolphins run game is so good with Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. But every time they need a run game to be good, it's nowhere to be found. I'm like, please tell me, where is this dynamic Miami Dolphins run game? Where is this dynamic Miami Dolphins offense whenever they need to show up? It's like, I don't care that you beat the Broncos and drop 70 on them to way screw with your stats here and get Raheem Mostert a ton of touchdowns and Devon Achane a ton of rushing yards in that game. I didn't care that you're beating up on bad teams like the New York Jets. I really don't, because if you can't show up and beat good teams, it's like, what else can you do? And it's not like it was for lack of talent. Jalen Waddle was playing in this game. You still had Tyreek Hill, couldn't find a way to get him involved. And if they're doubling Tyreek Hill, which they were on every play, what does that mean? Someone should be open in this game. And then when it comes down to it, it's like, Mike McDaniels, your team showed no fight in this game. They showed no interest in being there in this game. And this was a game you were hanging around in. The Kansas City Chiefs were dropping the ball left and right. They had to settle for field goals. Your defense wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. And your offense gets shut out in the second half. Like, this offense with the caliber of weapons that they have, what is the point of having Tyreek Hill if Tua can't throw the ball to him? Like, what is the point of having Jalen Waddle if Tua can't throw the ball past 10 yards? Like, I get it's cold, but it's cold for everyone. And just because you're from Miami doesn't mean that you're the only one miserable in the cold right now.
Everyone's miserable in the cold. It's being in the cold. Being in the cold and being miserable are both mutually inclusive here. So now the question that comes for the Dolphins after this game is, Tua is entering his 5th year. And
Yeah,
everyone else in this draft has been paid. Joe Burrow got paid. Justin Herbert got paid, and Jalen Hurts got paid. So all 3 of these guys who are starting and are regular starters, franchise guys, are getting paid, and they've been paid very handsomely. Now with Tua, at this point, he's slated to make $22 million in his 5th year option, and obviously he wants to get paid. He wants that security here, and he wants to figure out whether he's going to continue wherever he's living in Miami, if he should buy a house in Miami at this point, with the money that he is expected to make. And for me, as somebody watching this game and watching them all throughout this year, they really need to look in the mirror and say, do we really want to keep Tua? Is Tua going to bring us over the edge? We don't have a playoff. We don't make the playoffs to lose in the first round. We make it to make it to the Super Bowl and submit ourselves into fantasy history or NFL history here. And with Tua, you look at every other person you're going to run into: Lamar, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow. The list goes on. Tua is nowhere near as good as these guys. And this isn't a diss on Tua, but it's just the truth. If you're going to talk about making it to that next step, maybe it's looking to someone like Justin Fields or Kirk Cousins, or somebody who's at least going to be more affordable than what you're paying now, and somebody who isn't as limited as Tua is.
Yeah, someone who's not as limited as Tua is. And where did Mike McDaniels come from? San Francisco 49ers. What did they do with Jimmy Garoppolo as soon as they saw Jimmy Garoppolo was limited? And to preface this, the 49ers saw Jimmy Garoppolo as limited after he took them to a Super Bowl And after he took them to a conference championship, and they're perennial division winners. Perennial division winners, and they still saw him as limited. Tua has Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, and Raheem Mostert. He has not sniffed a division title. You cannot blame this year on health. You cannot blame this year on Skylar Thompson starting a playoff game. There's only one place to look, and that's Tua. Like, he's the only place you can look. You can point the finger at Mike McDaniels, but is Mike McDaniels supposed to inject steroids into Tua's arm to make him throw farther?
That's what I would
Can
do.
Mike McDaniels make him run faster? Can
That's
Mike
what I would do.
McDaniels make him not panic under pressure? Can Mike
That's what I would do.
McDaniel? I mean, he could. I mean, he could probably help with some of the confidence there, but they could help him with some pocket presence, but he just can't do it. And then every time Tyreek Hill isn't on the field, he looks like a shell of himself. So Jason Garrett, as much as I love him on the broadcast, he was like, yeah, well, all these teams who are moving on, it's because of a great quarterback. And with Miami, it's so hard to find a guy. So that's why they have to keep Tua. I'm just like, wait a minute. You just said all the teams who moved on have a great quarterback, but the Dolphins should keep Tua because they're not moving on because of Tua. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
He created an oxymoron on his own broadcast. You're the guy who's on national television. You're Mr. 8-8. You're being worshipped because you're in the presence of Mike Tirico, and he is blessing every word as holy NFL gospel. And this is the nonsense you give the people on a Saturday night game about Tua, how the Dolphins should keep him. It's like, no, absolutely not. Because if they actually had a guy who could throw the ball down the field and actually get out of the pocket, they would be just fine. So don't be surprised if Miami tries to make an aggressive move similar to what the San Francisco 49ers did when they went after Trey Lance, and go after someone like Jaden Daniels in the draft. Maybe go after someone like Michael Penix, someone like Bo Nix, who at least has arm strength.
Yeah, honestly, and I don't think it's a bad idea at all. You think about it, if you're going to package Tua in a trade here, maybe a team like the Commanders are interested, a team that has a pick at number 2. Maybe they're indifferent on Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or these other guys that could fall there. Why not make a leap where you know you're going to get a franchise guy, Tua Tagovailoa? You can get him there. He'll be good for you. He'll be solid. I think that he can go elsewhere and still succeed.
Yeah.
But I think that when it comes to the Dolphins, with how much they've pushed the chips into the table, saying, trading a bunch of picks for whether it be for Bradley Chubb or Tyreek Hill or all these other guys that they've moved up, Jalen Ramsey, all these trades that they've made, they're in a situation like the Rams have been, where they've traded all this draft capital to build a winning roster. And now the ultimate drawback that you have right now is your quarterback.
Yeah.
The Rams, what they did, they went out and they got Matthew Stafford. And then for the 49ers, they got very lucky and had a really solid quarterback fall to them at the very last pick of the draft. That doesn't happen very often. Their swing, unfortunately, they missed with Trey Lance. But making that push, getting that quarterback, whether it be a Jaden Daniels or a Drake May, or just trading up, getting somebody, going after a Kirk Cousins or whoever else might be available, I think at this point, you really don't have anything to lose at this point.
Yeah. And I would say, too, if the Miami Dolphins stick with Tua, and it's because of Mike McDaniels and he wants to stick with Tua and roll with the same team, then Mike McDaniels should go down with the shift. If he wants to move Tua and he's of the opinion that maybe we should move off this quarterback and go a different direction because this is not someone we can afford to pay $35 million with all the pieces we need to keep on this team. Christian Wilkins, his payday is coming up on their defensive line, and he played outstanding in that Buffalo Bills game, and he's the best player on defense for them. Are we keeping Jalen Ramsey, Tyreek Hill? We're going to have to pay Jalen Waddle eventually. It's like, okay, someone's going to want to pay any of those guys a bag. Can we really afford to pay Tua? And if you do, we can predict how the situation is going to pan out. All you have to do is look at Dallas and be like, oh, they paid Dak Prescott. And every time you pay an average quarterback, superstar quarterback money, it never works out. You can pay a superstar quarterback money. You'll get to the Super Bowl and win with someone like Patrick Mahomes, someone like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. But you can't pay someone like Matt Ryan. You can't pay someone like Andy Dalton. You can't pay someone like Kirk Cousins. You can't pay someone like Dak Prescott. So if you do pay Tua, well, that's the precedent you're going to set. And then are you going to renegotiate him down to Jimmy Garoppolo money? No, because someone is going to be dumb enough to be like, look at the numbers. Look at how good his numbers are. And then they're going to show that to the owner. And then they'll be like, okay, I guess we should sign Tua. Sorry, Panthers.
The Panthers. I think that there's a lot of teams that will be interested in his services. And that's why I think that you mentioned going after one of these guys in the draft, these big
Yeah.
three that we're talking about. I don't think the Bears are in that position where they would trade that first round overall pick.
No.
But a team like the Commanders are a prime team where they don't know exactly what they're going to be getting with any of these guys here. They have a decent enough amount of cap space.
Yeah.
And I think that their roster isn't nearly as bad as it comes off that 5-12 record.
Yeah.
So maybe it's trading Tua and a couple of draft picks for that second overall pick, getting a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels. Then you're paying him $8 to $10 million a year for the next 4 years, where you can pay these other guys that you're talking about. So the Dolphins' ultimate solution, I think, at this point is trading after somebody who has arm strength, who is more mobile. I think that would benefit the Dolphins more anyways, opens up the run game with someone. I even mentioned Justin Fields earlier.
Yeah.
Justin Fields is in a similar predicament to Tua where someone has to pay him, but I think Justin Fields has a lot more upside to him, especially if he has a solid offensive-minded head coach like a Mike McDaniels. If they can sign him to like a 2-year deal, kind of a prove-it deal, then I think that they're in a better place with Justin Fields than they do with Tua at that point.
Yeah, and I was of the opinion that the Dolphins should have kept Carson Wentz on their bench all year and had him learning the system, because every kind of flaw, he's kind of the inverse player of Tua, where Tua has anticipation and he's accurate, where Carson Wentz is more, he's going to stay in the pocket. He's going to hold the ball a little bit too long, but what does he have that Tua doesn't? Arm strength. And I know we're going to get some people in the comments that are like, well, it was one of the coldest games in NFL history and it was -26. Don't you think that played a factor with the Miami Dolphins? I'm like, yes. And I think that will be the case in Kansas City for the foreseeable future in January and February. I think that will be the case where you get that chill off the lake in Cincinnati, where you get the chill off the lake in Buffalo, where it's going to be freezing cold in Baltimore, where if the Patriots ever step up again, or any team in the AFC North, like the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's like, this is the AFC. This is AFC football. We're not playing in domes. We're playing outside in the wintertime. So if you don't like it, unless you're going to Houston, it's like every situation's going to be like this. Or you could, I don't know, beat winning teams so you could get home field advantage, so a team that doesn't start 6-6 can catch up to you when you only had 3 losses at one point in the regular season. Then you lose to them at home. Like, don't complain to me about the weather when all you had to do was beat one team.
All you had to do was win a couple more winning teams. If you could beat anybody who had a winning record, then at that point you would have had that division win. You would have faced the Steelers. You probably would have been just fine at home. And then you would end up facing Miami at home next round. Where
Kansas City, yeah. You would host Kansas City next week.
And then, God forbid, the Texans beat the Ravens next week. You could have run through the AFC
Yeah.
all at home. But God forbid, you beat a team like the Bills. God forbid, you beat the Chiefs. God forbid, you beat one of these winning teams, the Ravens. No, you couldn't do that. So ultimately, the Dolphins built their own grave at this point. And this is what they have to walk into. Do we pay Tua?
Yeah.
Do we have to make some serious roster decisions, moving on from some of these other guys who are wanting to get paid, so that we can keep Tua? I think that the answer is very clear. You'll get a decent amount of a package for Tua. Go out and move on from him, as he's still, people considered him to be an MVP candidate all year.
Yeah.
Go on, ship him off to a team who is desperate for a quarterback, similar to what we saw from the Browns a couple of years ago, moving on.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a Commanders team, or maybe it's a new ownership that wants to get a formidable quarterback. He's a formidable quarterback, just not for the Dolphins.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about the Dolphins is there was a Monday night a few weeks ago where that was the game I pointed to and said, okay, Tua should not be there next year because you're 3 minutes left. No other team since 2014, I believe it's the Indianapolis Colts, and Andrew Luck had come down from being down 2 touchdowns with 3 minutes left on Monday Night Football versus Mayo Boy Will Levis, who eats bananas with the peel on, versus Mike Vrabel in his last year with the Titans, coaching his butt off versus you, and you couldn't stop Will Levis. Not only that, you couldn't stop Will Levis, you couldn't get 1 field goal in the last 3 minutes of that game to ice the Titans and secure home field. That's the reason why you're in this situation, is because you're the first team since 2014 to blow a 2-touchdown lead with 3 minutes left. That's why you didn't deserve to have a home game this year. That's why Tua doesn't deserve to get paid this year. And that's why you went home early this year.
And that's why you're one of the teams who got embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs. And with the Chiefs here, I don't think the Chiefs played their best game by any means. They
No.
won. The score shows that they dominated them throughout, and they did. Their defense played spectacular. But at the same time, their offense showed that it's still limited. Rashid Rice had a great game. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like Patrick Mahomes, all he needs is a solid receiver and a couple of other guys to catch the ball every once in a while. And he moved on from your team. And that
Yeah.
was how easy it was for him.
Yeah, and you lost to a team that I will not put in the top 5 of the show until they cut Kadarius Toney. This team is so desperate for wide receivers that they still have, yes, Kadarius Toney on this team. And then you let not just Isaiah Pacheco run on you, but you know who else was making plays in this game?
Don't say his
Your
name.
nemesis, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. In this
Enemy of the
game.
show.
You know who didn't show up in this game? Travis Kelce. What in the drops is going on with Travis Kelce? Are you using too much lotion on your hands for Taylor Swift? We don't know what's going on with Travis Kelce. Why can't he catch anymore? Is he looking forward to retirement like his brother Jason Kelce? But when you talk about it with Tom Brady, he was a quarterback who all he needed was Gronk and Edelman, and then they would have some other wide receivers filter out this year. But all Patrick Mahomes needs is a run game. One of the best defenses left in football now with L'Jarius Sneed, Chris Jones, George Karlaftis showed up with the big sack in this game, and then one of the best offensive lines in football. And then Patrick Mahomes, every time the playoffs show up, it's like teams forget that he can run because he doesn't do it in the regular season because he doesn't particularly want to put himself in harm's way. But this game, anytime they needed a third down, Patrick Mahomes, okay. And then you're like, okay, he's going to shuffle out of bounds here. And they're like, oh no, he picked up an extra 10 yards there. And those are the little things that Patrick Mahomes does to elevate his games in the playoffs, similarly to what the Bills did with Josh Allen ramping up his run game coming into the playoffs. But like you lost to Travis Kelce, who could not catch anything in this game. This is a team that led the league in drops this year. You let Clyde Edwards-Helaire make big plays, enemy of the show, as is Gabe Davis. And then Rashid Rice, who is a really good rookie, but he dominated you in this game. And then they dropped 26, and then they still dominated. They dominated.
Yeah, their defense didn't show up either. So the Dolphins, massive disappointments throughout the season. We were fans of them entering the season. We thought all the speed, all the firepower that they have, they should surely make enough noise in the AFC. Well, they are definitely fraudulent. They have a lot of things to go over in the offseason, whether it's Tua, whether it's refining that defense. Is Vic Fangio gone? We don't know yet, but
Yeah.
a lot of moving pieces there. Dolphins disappoint. Chiefs prevail. They'll face the Bills next week. And then we go on to the Sunday games where we saw the first of these games being probably the most precious, which was the Cowboys and Packers game. And this is the game that we really should lick our chops here. We should really get in our bag for a minute because going into this game, every single media pundit said it's going to be the Cowboys. Are they going to face the Niners or are they going to face the Eagles?
Clean sweep across the board.
Clean sweep across the board. Every single media pundit said it's going to be the Cowboys and it's not going to be particularly close. And they were right about one thing. It was not particularly close. But unfortunately, they didn't know the classic Beatles message. All you need is love. Because Jordan Love destroyed them in this game. Eerily similar numbers to none other than CJ Stroud boy. In
the same quarterback rating, the same number of touchdowns. They're like within 4 yards of each other. And he was 16 of 21.
16 of 21. The difference, all but 2 yards between them in CJ Stroud here. So Jordan Love comes in immediately, scores a touchdown, get a 3 and out for the Cowboys. They score again, and then another punt for the Cowboys, and then the Packers score again. Before they look up, they're losing 24-0, getting absolutely embarrassed. Their defense, where was the Cowboys defense? Where is this Cowboys team that was holding the Panthers to 3 points, or the Patriots, or all these other teams? Oh, turns out the Cowboys are very similar to the Dolphins. They're frauds. That's what the Cowboys are, and that's what they've always been. And this is what we said previewing Super Wildcard Weekend. We said, I don't know, this Packers team, they don't know what they don't know. Jordan Love, been one of the best quarterbacks in the league the last several weeks. Aaron Jones.
8 weeks.
Aaron Jones he's back, he's fresh, he's ready to rock. And then all these receivers, you can't really game plan for because you don't know which one's going to succeed any given week. whether it's Jaden Reed, the leader of the receivers in this wide receiver room. Maybe it's Christian Watson.
Romeo.
Maybe it's Tucker Kraft. Maybe it's Romeo. There art thou, Romeo. Dobbs in this game, who had a fantastic game, 150 yards. Packers annihilate the Cowboys, the most embarrassing Cowboys loss in Cowboys history. And ultimately, what it's become is the Cowboys having a really good regular season. They're 12-5 for the third year in a row. And for the third year in a row, they have embarrassed themselves in primetime. And now, Mike McCarthy, who knows whether or not he's going to stay? I'd be very surprised if they kept him next year.
Yeah.
And now the Cowboys, yet again, looking at their team with all the talent, whether it's the Defensive Player of the Year, Deron Bland, or Micah Parsons, or all these other guys here. Maybe it's CeeDee Lamb, Offensive Player of the Year, or MVP candidate at one point, Dak Prescott, who, by the way, had as many passing yards in the first quarter as you and I did. Yeah. 1 for 4, 1 interception and 0 yards. That's your MVP, I guess. That's who the media picked as the MVP at one point during the season. So the Cowboys, back to the same old Cowboys, losing in the first round yet again to the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, losing yet again to the Green Bay Packers in the first round. And this game was awesome because of how predictable it was to predict the right outcome for this game. Not only because we said this was going to be the matchup a couple months ago coming into it, and that we were starting to get the feeling that the Green Bay Packers could upset them. But when we were talking about this game, I mentioned 3 things very specific to this game. One of them was Aaron Jones. I called him the Cowboy Killer. I'm wearing the Cowboy Killer hat. And I said, Aaron Jones is someone who goes to Jerry World and has been the Cowboys' nightmare player to deal with. He's been the player that's gone to Jerry World and ran all over them, lit them up. Even when they had Aaron Rodgers last year, the Cowboys were able to go there and get it, or the Packers were able to go to Jerry World and get it done versus the Cowboys. And then I mentioned the quarterback matchup. Everyone lost their mind. They're like, you think Jordan Love is Brady? I'm like, no, I never said he's Brady. However, I do think he's been playing better than Dak Prescott. I do think there's more pressure on Dak Prescott. So I think that Jordan Love is going to be the better player in this game because he can make more throws than Dak Prescott. And he has better receivers and a better offense at this point than Dak Prescott. And people are like, how could you say that the Packers have a better offense? Well, Mike McCarthy was outdated when he was fired around 10 years ago. And Matt LaFleur came in there and took over. I don't know if it's 10 years ago. It was around 6 years ago. But Matt LaFleur took over for Mike McCarthy because Mike McCarthy's offense was outdated. It was old. And the Cowboys offense looked outdated and old. And all year long with the Dallas Cowboys have been saying, what run game? Really? Deuce Vaughn, 6 foot, not 6'6", like 4'6" out of college this year. Like you're relying on Deuce Vaughn. Then Tony Pollard is someone I'm like, you can't just turn and give the ball to Tony Pollard and ice the game the same way you could do with Ezekiel Elliott. I'm like, look at all the big games that Dak Prescott does not have a 100-yard rusher. It does not turn out particularly well for Dak Prescott. And then all year long, we've been saying they don't have the best wide receiver room in the league because you don't know what you're going to get from Michael Gallup or Brandon Cooks on a given week here. And then Jake Ferguson is someone who disappeared in the Lions game. He had a pretty good catch in this game, but overall, he wasn't there for Dak when he needed them. And then CeeDee Lamb, what the hell was going on with CeeDee Lamb in this game? We have the game on. The Packers go up, and then there's a drive. The Packers score again, and then CeeDee Lamb is on the sideline being talked to by Mike McCarthy. And then Dak Prescott goes over there as well. I'm like, why is CeeDee Lamb in the sunken place right now? What's going on with CeeDee Lamb? And then the Packers ended up limiting his catches to, it was a dig route here. It was a slant route here, and they were getting them on the ground. And the last thing I said about this game, after we covered Jair Alexander, after we covered Jordan Love being better than Dak Prescott, after we covered the Packers having the better run game than the Dallas Cowboys, after we covered Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, and Aaron Jones. We didn't even have the farm simulator in this game playing in A.J. Dillon. He was out with a neck injury. After we covered all of those pieces on offense being better than the Dallas Cowboys, you know what we forgot to mention? We forgot to mention Matt LaFleur over Mike McCarthy, and Mike McCarthy is a coach who won a Super Bowl with the Green Bay Packers. And if you look at history, there has never been a coach to win a Super Bowl with a team and then come back to beat them. And that was the final nail in the coffin for the Dallas Cowboys because Matt LaFleur looked like the better coach. Mike McCarthy's offense was outdated in Green Bay. That's why they moved on from him. And then he's someone who admitted in his opening press conference to lying in his interview. He lied. He said, yeah, I watched every single Dallas Cowboys game. In the press conference, he's like, oh, yeah, I may have lied about that. I'm like, are you kidding me? And then this defense that Micah Parsons is hyping up, saying that he can not only deal with the Green Bay Packers, but everyone was penciling them into the conference championship. But you couldn't stop Jordan Love, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, the youngest offense in the league. And then Jair Alexander is like, yes, I picked off a few quarterbacks, and now Dak Prescott threw me an interception. So he's one of my top quarterbacks now going forward since I got that interception off of him. And he was another player where, like, don't sleep on Jair Alexander. He's going to make a play in this game. And he did. And then Mike McCarthy in this game, no inspiration on offense. And then Dan Quinn and the defense, Micah Parsons, defensive player of the year. Tony Romo talking about how he wants to be not just the defensive player of the year, but the MVP of the league, competing with his own quarterback. Deron Bland, who some people said was the most valuable non-quarterback in the league at the time before he got roasted by DK Metcalf, and everyone laughed about what a joke that was at the time. But your defense just gets absolutely shredded. You're playing zone. Jordan Love picks you apart. And then Dak Prescott completely falls apart. And we were saying, Dak is not elite all year long. I did not put the Cowboys all but once on the top 5. And as soon as I did, they get annihilated from the Bills and weren't put on the top 5 again. For this reason, because I knew this was going to happen. Look at who they played all year long. Look at how their offense played on the road and against good teams all year long. Not very good, and we've been saying it's CeeDee Lamb or bust, and their offense looked like that in this game.
Yeah, you know what this game really is for everybody? It's a victory lap. It's a victory lap for the Brickyard for calling this game, not just this Super Wildcard preview, but all throughout the season. We're like, I don't know about this Cowboys team. They beat up on a lot of really bad teams, can't beat a winning team. Victory lap for us. Victory lap for the history buffs, which is also the Brickyard, because we said the Packers own the Cowboys, whether it's with Brett Favre, whether it's with Aaron Rodgers, or especially if it's with Jordan Love. A victory lap for the history buffs of the world. And then a victory lap for the Packers. This is a team that at one point I put in the bottom 5 because of how bad they looked up until week 6. I said, how could you move on from Aaron Rodgers for this guy? Because Jordan Love did look not the best. He did not look very good the first 6 weeks of the season. At one point, they looked like fools moving on from the Mike McCarthys and the Aaron Rodgers and starting anew. And look at them now, moving on from Mike McCarthy for Matt LaFleur. That looks like it's been very successful for them as they've made it to multiple NFC title games since then, something the Cowboys have not done. And then moving on from Aaron Rodgers, the breakup that was inevitable for 4 years before it actually happened. They move on. Where are the Jets in the playoffs? Oh, wait, nowhere. Not. Where's Aaron Rodgers? Rehabbing. And then they get not their first, not their second, but their third consecutive franchise guy in a row, making it look like a franchise quarterback is all but inevitable when Jordan Love retires in the next 15 years, getting another guy to fill in for him. Victory lap for the Packers and victory lap especially for the Cowboys haters of the world. Yeah. Basically, they say America's team. No, this is a team that America unites against because of what the media has said about him the last 20 years, wanting them so badly to be successful, but they just can't get themselves out of their own way, inevitably crashing and burning the way they did. And then especially the one last victory lap is for people who are not Dak stans like us, people who are realists.
Truth tellers.
Dak Prescott. I've never had an issue with Dak Prescott. I think Dak Prescott is a fine quarterback. But is he a quarterback that the Dallas Cowboys, who have a top 5 wide receiver, a top 5 defense, a top 5 offensive line, and at points in time have a top running back at certain points, is this the team that should have Dak Prescott on their team?
Yeah.
No, not at this point. Not for $50 million.
No.
So victory lap for the Dallas Cowboy haters, the history buffs, the Packers, and especially the Brickyard.
Yeah, victory lap for the Brickyard. And then all year long, we've been battling people saying You're just a hater. How can you not say Dak Prescott is not top 5? How can you look at his numbers this season and say he's not an elite quarterback? Because numbers lie. I don't care that you racked up a bunch of junk yards against a bunch of bad teams this year. What I want to see you do is go to an environment like Buffalo where the Bills Mafia is there and then show up versus a tough defense and then actually make it a game instead of just getting run all over by James Cook. Like, show up to a shootout. And this is exactly what happened last time the Packers played them in the playoffs. I believe the Packers were up 21-0 and then it was 21-7. Then they went up 28-7. Then Dak Prescott has a bunch of empty calories and wills his team back. But I said, this is not a guy who's going to win a Super Bowl for you, and he should not be considered as a valuable player when you have to pay an average quarterback who does not show up in the playoffs over $70 million in a given season. He has a no trade clause. Are you kidding me? For a guy who is this pathetic in a playoff game where he falls down a touchdown to Jordan Love and you just see the terror in his eyes. I'm like, oh my God, I'm down at home where I'm undefeated 16-0 the past 16 games in Dallas. And then I fall down 7-0 to Jordan Love and all of a sudden I tighten up and don't show up in the first quarter. Like, you're undefeated at home. You're touting this, and then everyone in the media penciling them into the conference championship, and they're going over, well, what if the Rams beat the Lions? Like, what if the Rams beat the Lions? Oh, wait, they weren't. And if you watch that show, you would know that the Lions were going to beat the Rams. And then this is justice from the NFL gods. You want to talk about victory laps? This is a victory lap for justice for Detroit, because what that game did, not only did it give Jared Goff the opportunity to get revenge on Matthew Stafford, not only did it give them the opportunity to host a home game versus the worst possible opponent in the NFC, because I think that the Packers are better than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at this point, but you also give the Lions the opportunity to not have to play the Green Bay Packers in the first round after they split in the regular season. This is a divisional opponent that knows them. Green Bay has owned the North for the past 2 decades, and you haven't won a playoff game in 30 years, but you give Detroit the opportunity to get revenge against Stafford and move on to the conference championship and have that second home game and not play the Packers. So the NFL, I said, it has a weird way of evening itself out in the end, and I think it's going to come in the form of a Dallas Cowboys loss, and that is exactly what happened, because you screwed over the Lions in a game they should have beat the Cowboys, which gave the Cowboys some extra confidence that they did not need. And then every single post on who's the most likely team to make it out of the NFC, one was the Niners. Okay, no problem with that. But every single team's number 2 was the Dallas Cowboys. I'm like, really? What have they shown us? Like, really, what game can you point to and be like, that's a reason why they should be the number 2 contender behind the 49ers? Because they haven't shown it. I wouldn't even care if you put the Rams above them coming into it.
Yeah, no, and this is another victory lap again for the Lions, because you saw them get absolutely betrayed by the NFL refs and that absolute bogus call. So justice for the Brickyard, justice for the Packers, justice for history buffs, justice for the realists of the NFL who don't believe in Dak Prescott being worth $50 million. Justice for the truth. And,
justice for the truth.
And that is why we stay brick in this place.
And I said it was going to be a case where every single person was going to pick the Dallas Cowboys to win this game unless they pick the Packers. Hell, Packers fans have to call you out in our comments because you're like, oh, I'm trying to be an objective fan, but I can't find a reason to pick your team. Like, really? You can't find any reason where we're not even fans of the Packers? This isn't even a Green Bay Packers podcast, yet we had the knowledge, we had the facts, we had the truth, we had the foresight, we had the oracle into the future to say that the Green Bay Packers were going to not only beat the Cowboys, but at least cover the spread and win by 2 scores in this game, that Aaron Jones and their offense was better than the Cowboys, that Matt LaFleur was the better head coach, that the Cowboys would crumble under pressure. Like, you're a fan of your own team. You should know that this was coming, especially since you've beat these guys the last 9 out of the last 10 games, and now it's 10 out of 11. You really weren't confident in your own team. We're more confident than the Packers fans that they were going to beat Dallas.
Yes, you gotta look in the mirror every once in a while and say, I am good.
Yeah,
I am good.
I am
And
good.
Jordan Love was doing that all season long. When he was struggling, he said, I am good. I am a franchise quarterback. I am good. And what did he do? The last 8 games, 21 touchdowns, 3 picks. We'll take that.
Yeah.
Winning his first playoff game as a Packer. And now the Packers have as many playoff wins at
Yeah.
Jerry World as the Cowboys do since opening it.
Yeah, and the Packers have as many playoff wins, and the Houston Texans are officially the best Texas team since 2002, where the Houston Texans formed in Houston, and they were able to not have one playoff win when the Cowboys have four. They had 2 playoff wins when the Cowboys had 4, but they have 5 playoff wins now when the Cowboys have 4. They now have the best quarterback in Texas in CJ Stroud. And that brings us to skeletons in the Cowboys closet, which led them here. And that is they're probably not going to move off of Dak. But I said a couple months ago that the Cowboys were going to lose in their first playoff matchup because they weren't beating anybody. And then that Mike McCarthy was probably on his way out. And he is a perfect candidate to be a safe hire for the Carolina Panthers at this point if they are not set on Nikki Haley, if they want to finish the NFL. I know Nikki Haley is tempting if you're the Carolina Panthers because
Absolutely.
what she wants to do is go out there and finish people. But at the same time, you may not want to look towards a politician. Maybe David Tepper wants someone who he can share powder with. And this is probably how the interview would go for the Panthers. Like, Mike McCarthy, I hear you like the white powder. Mike McCarthy would not understand that this is someone who previously worked in finance, someone who is in a situation or a party similar to something in Wolf of Wall Street. Mike McCarthy still has his mind in Wisconsin. He's still thinking about powdered jelly donuts. But they'll embrace each other over their love for white powder and then completely disconnect there. And then in the press conference, Mike McCarthy was like, we bonded over white powder. That's how I got this job. Because David Tepper is the only person I've met who is as passionate about jelly donuts as I am.
Yes. If they don't go the Nikki Haley route, I know Nikki Haley wanted to blow up Carolina, whether it was the state of Carolina or maybe it was just the front office. We're not entirely sure. Nikki Haley, if you want to comment on it, please do.
Teams can't beat us if there's no NFL teams for us to beat.
If we turn the NFL into a crater, who knows what'll happen? Nikki Haley says, unofficial quote. Mike McCarthy, I do agree that he could be a Panther, but I do also believe that Bill Belichick should be the next person in line for the Cowboys. I think about it this way. Everywhere that he has gone, he's taken risks that the owner doesn't particularly love. For example, when he was in Cleveland, they had Bernie Kosar, and for some reason, the city of Cleveland loved Bernie Kosar. His first move as a Brown is to trade him to the Cowboys, inevitably. And then he goes to New England, where they just paid Drew Bledsoe the most money in NFL history. He says, well, this 6th-round quarterback isn't too bad in Tom Brady. Let's move on and have him as the future. I don't remember. I'm not much of a history buff. What happened there, I'm not entirely sure. Pretty sure they were pretty good there. And then now the inevitable, which I think is going to happen after the Cowboys have the biggest, most disappointing playoff loss of all time. It's time for Jerry Jones to look himself in the mirror. If I want to win, I'm going to go after the winningest head coach in NFL history. Micah Parsons, his stock goes up. Stephon Gilmore, Deron Bland, Defensive Player of the Year, Deron Bland, goes up in stock. Trayvon Diggs, another guy who's been in the Defensive Player conversation. He takes over that defense. That defense gets a lot better. And I think his first order of business as the Cowboys head coach is going to be moving on from Dak Prescott because that's what he's done everywhere else. Watch and see. The Cowboys are going to go and pursue Bill Belichick. It's the most attractive job out there currently. And I think that's what they're going to ultimately end up doing. By the end of this show, by the time this is out, we're probably going to see Mike McCarthy parting ways with the Cowboys. And then that's going to set up the opportunity for Bill Belichick to take over. And what does Bill Belichick like the most? He likes value, and he likes to not overpay for players. Who is one of the most overpaid players in the NFL at this point? Dakota Prescott. And where's Dakota Prescott will have plenty of suitors. There's plenty of desperate teams. Cowboys are going to go out there, trade him, and I think that that's ultimately how they're going to right the new ship as they move on from this embarrassing loss.
Yeah, Dak Prescott's contract is like buying Bitcoin at $67,000. It only goes down from here. Like, honestly, and if you're the Cowboys, it's like he's not someone who's gonna overtake anyone. And like, look at who the quarterbacks are in the NFC right now, and it's not overly impressive. We have Brock Purdy, who had a bye. We had Jared Goff, who his team traded away a first round pick to get rid of. We have Jordan Love, who we said was going to be the better quarterback in this game, and we said the Green Bay Packers had the quarterback advantage. Now he's better than Dak Prescott. And then we said all year long that Jared Goff is better than Dak, and that has proven to be true because Jared Goff has been to a Super Bowl, has been to many conference championships, and now has a chance to get to another one. And then we have Baker Mayfield. You want to talk about a guy who is cheap? You want to talk about a team who is in salary cap hell, and they're like, we just need to pay a guy to be our quarterback. Hopefully, he's pretty okay. Baker Mayfield comes out there. They beat Philadelphia in that game. He's moving on. You see the value of Baker being more valuable than Dak as a quarterback this year. So it's like you look around the NFC, this is a conference that isn't loaded with all these elite quarterbacks. That's mostly on the AFC. And if Dak can't even get past the first round in that conference, like it's pretty much a wrap at this point. And then because you paid him, you can't have Amari Cooper here. And then that's a great reason why Belichick would get off of him. And then everyone is stealing my Belichick take. I had this take before everyone else, but I was like, watch out for Bill Belichick leaving New England this year. And then the Cowboys are going to underperform and maybe move on from Mike McCarthy. So watch for Bill Belichick to go to Dallas. And then as soon as the Cowboys lose, everyone's calling for Bill Belichick. But months ago, we were talking about how Bill Belichick should be the next Dallas Cowboys head coach and how great that would be. And the only thing stopping that is Jerry Jones and Bill Belichick's ego. If he can't be the GM, if that's something he really wants in Atlanta, we'll give that to him. And he met with Atlanta. We'll get to that in the preview. However, it's like with this, we called Bill Belichick leaving the Patriots. We also called him going to how everyone would want him to go to Dallas as well. But the only thing is, Jason Garrett, 8-8, 8-8, 8-8, 12-4 losing record, then 8-8. So it's like he averages 8 wins a season. That was good enough for Jerry Jones. Is there any part in your mind where you're like, maybe Jerry doesn't move on from Mike McCarthy? Or do you think just with how much he's lied to Jerry Jones, like, yeah, I want to run the football this year, and then he gets rid of Kellen Moore because Jerry Jones didn't want him, how he lied to get the job there? Do you think that's a reason why he would move off of him, where Jason Garrett is more like a son to him because he played to the team?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Jason Garrett, first of all, he didn't lie to him, which is number one. Secondly, I don't know whether or not he underperformed or not. He was average throughout his entire time, but he also was like a second son to him. So
Yeah.
Jerry Jones, he's very much believes in, family, believes in trust, believes in giving, paying their dues.
Who's he, Vin Diesel?
That's why he paid
Family.
Zeke. That's why he paid Romo. That's why he paid Dak. He paid them because he believes in them, he trusts them, and he thinks of them as family. I don't think he thinks as Mike McCarthy as family because, for one thing, to get the job, he lied. That's number one. And then what has he done since then? He has one playoff win since he's joined them, and that's with perennial 12-4 teams, with the best Cowboys defense that we've seen on paper, maybe of our lifetime at this point, with some of the talent they have there. And what has it amounted to? It's amounted to them losing and getting crushed by the 49ers, getting crushed by the Packers, and then winning a lollipop game against a beaten, decrepit Tampa Bay Bucks team. So I don't think it's out of our imagination. And because of how bad of a loss it was, if it was like a 30-28 kind of game and they fought hard and it was just ultimately the Packers prevailed, it would have been upsetting. But for them to go down 24-0,
Yeah.
look absolutely pathetic with CeeDee Lamb literally in tears on the sideline before the first quarter is even over, with Dak Prescott not having a single passing yard in the first quarter. This was the most pathetic Cowboys game. What must come up must come down, similar to the Bitcoin analogy. And I think it's inevitable that we're going to see Mike McCarthy looking for another job. I know you said he liked white powder, so maybe it's a Honeydew Donut sponsorship. Maybe it's Dunkin' Donuts. Maybe he goes to Krispy Kreme if he's in the South.
Next coordinator for the Patriots offense, maybe.
Possibly. But I do think that it's inevitable Mike McCarthy will be fired because I think you can't go into next year with the same personnel after you guys just got embarrassed the way you did.
Yeah, after you got embarrassed. And I think Jerry Jones, like he said, this is the most horrifying loss we've ever had. So it is pointing in that right direction for the Cowboys to get rid of him. But again, this is such a epic fail from the mainstream media where we saw this coming. We predicted this, yet no one on that panel had the guts to agree with us. And the fact that Cowboys there are old men that are still calling halftime that coached for you, that played for you. One of them being Jimmy Johnson. At halftime, Jimmy Johnson looked like he was about to have a heart attack. You cannot do this to the senior citizens that root for you, to the senior citizens that still watch the mainstream fake news media that thought you were going to win this game because everyone said you were a lock and a pencil in for the NFC Championship and had more value in you than the Detroit Lions, the Green Bay Packers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are all moving on right now, who thought you could beat the San Francisco 49ers, and they believed Micah Parsons when they said we're not 42-10 bad versus the Niners. Well, you probably are, because you were 48-16 bad versus the Jordan Love Packers and Coach Eyebrows. So you have the senior citizens of Texas to think about, and you damn near gave Jimmy Johnson a heart attack with his inspirational speech, which you took no inspiration from.
No, instead you were just even worse. And Jimmy Johnson's a very old man. Jimmy Johnson's in his late 70s.
He could have died.
You don't want to see a dead man on television.
No.
I certainly don't. If I want to see a dead man on television, I watch the White House press conference. Other than that, I'm not here to look at dead men on television, especially a seasoned great like Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah.
How great he was for the Cowboys 30 years ago. I don't know. I saw it on VHS. I'm sure it was a great time back in the 90s, but I'm not I was from 1998. I was shitting in diapers in the 90s. I'm not entirely sure. I'm assuming someone in the comments can tell me how great it was. I'm sure it was fantastic on your Walkman tape players, but I digress. We've talked about the Cowboys a lot. Let's talk about another team that a lot of the panels all picked the Rams to win against the Lions. They gave the Lions no chance to win, setting up a circumstance where it was hoisting their first playoff game, trying to get their first playoff win since 1991. They're going up against Matt Stafford. We talk about the Lions all season long with hurdles, starting in week 1 against the Chiefs, against the defending champs. Can they go out and succeed against them? Are they legit? And then along the way, there was hurdles. Can they beat the Packers? They beat the Packers. Can they overcome the loss to the Ravens? They do. And then ultimately coming in, formulating into this game where they're facing off against their hero in Detroit in Matt Stafford, who was there for 12 years, was great for them. He goes to LA, wins the Super Bowl. They get Jared Goff, who the Rams basically discarded, threw him away like he was trash. And here we are now, culminating into a playoff victory for the Detroit Lions, overcoming another hurdle in the Detroit's journey to Super Bowl greatness.
Yeah, overcoming another hurdle in the journey to Detroit greatness. And this was a 3-point game in the spread. They're basically saying, we don't know who's going to win this game. We think it could be the Lions, but most of the media thought it was going to be the LA Rams. And it was a similar rationale. If only they could have applied this to the Green Bay Packers and Dallas Cowboys game, where all the pressure was going to be on the Cowboys. Well, all the pressure was on the Lions in this game. We did not expect the LA Rams to be there. No one in the media thought the Rams would be this good coming into the playoffs. So as far as them making the playoffs, that was success on its own. And then Matthew Stafford going back to Detroit. He doesn't have anything to prove in Detroit. He was there for so long, gave them his blood, his sweat, his tears over many broken bones, many injuries suffered in Detroit there. He went to LA and got his Super Bowl. So Matthew Stafford's like, hey, we have no beef with you, Sean McVay. There's no pressure on him to win this game. There was no pressure on the Rams to win this game. And teams were picking them because all eyes were on Detroit and all eyes were on Jared Goff. Well, Jared Goff in this game, when he wasn't being pressured, 21 of 21 absolutely dealing in this game, and Detroit came out on fire in the first half, and they could definitely see the intensity was there. This is their first home playoff game. However, this is a team where Jared Goff was traded because he was crumbling under pressure. They gave away a first-round pick to not have them on their team and just threw him away to Detroit. However, 21 for 21 when there was no pressure on him in this game. And then we saw Amon-Ra show up in this game. We saw the Lions show up in this game. We saw Dan Campbell getting his guys ready to go for this game. And then the Rams, my worry about them was Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. They were able to neutralize Cooper Kupp in this game. They were able to hold their offense down for the most part, except for Puka Nacua. He went off for a rookie record in a playoff debut, so he's pretty much shattered every record. If you're a receiver and want to shatter a record, go play with Matthew Stafford because he was making some incredible throws in this game, but all pressure on the Lions. It was 1 point, and they ended up getting it done. I was having a heart attack at the end of that game. I was like, not like this. Not to Matthew Stafford, not to Sean McVay, who looked like an absolute villain, just chilling there on the sideline, hoping Jared Goff would mess up. But Jared Goff didn't give them the turnover they were looking for, and the Lions were able to hold on just long enough to win this game. And it's showing how far they could come because we were really worried about Kyron Williams in this game, and the Lions were able to stop the run game there. And then every time in the first half, the Rams got to the red zone. They allowed 1 touchdown, but they forced them to settle for field goals, which ended up being enough for the Lions. And we picked the Lions in this game. I picked them to go to the Super Bowl. I think you picked the Niners, but they have the path to the conference championship. We picked them winning this week. We picked them all year long. We valued them, and they ended up rising to the occasion. And this was the game that if it's any year, it's this year for them. It's the Detroit Lions, not the Dallas Cowboys, especially if you've been watching them all year long. Anytime they faced adversity this season, they responded. Aiden Hutchinson showed up with 2 sacks in this game, who had a great play. Sam Laporta was able to play in this game. He had a catch, but he was just on the field, able to be a decoy, and just what a moment for Detroit. The fans hanging out there longer. You had Calvin Johnson there trying to break the curse. You had Eminem waiting to be put in the game, trying to break the curse. I don't think the Lions have won a playoff game since Eminem started making music, at least releasing studio albums, because that was in 91. I think Marshall Mathers LP1 came out in 99, 98, somewhere around there. So this is the first win under Eminem, and then all the pressure just goes away after this game because now all that tension just releases, and next game versus Tampa, they can just kind of go out there and play free.
Yeah, and I think I had a good feeling about this game. Going into it, we both picked the Lions to win. I just felt something's in the air in Detroit. I'm a Red Sox fan. I got to witness 2004 and 2007. I watched the Chicago Cubs and what they had to deal with to overcome that curse, how they eradicated that curse. And something feels different about this Detroit team, and we've said it all year. We said it last year when they just barely missed the playoffs with them building the roots there. And it started with Matthew Stafford walking out to the field and them aggressively booing him. And everyone I saw Twitter go crazy over this. So like, oh my God, how could you boo Matt Stafford? I'll tell you why. It's a playoff game, okay? A playoff game against your former foe. This is a tactic. This is a war tactic when it comes down to it. Why are we going to cheer you? If you guys faced off in week 3, sure, we'll give you that honorary moment that you so desperately need, Mr. Stafford. But in a playoff game, I could care less. They could throw tomatoes at him for all I care. Don't actually do that. But hurdle game for the Lions. They eradicate. They are reframing history for a team that's been battered down. We saw them go 0-16 in our lifetime. But have we seen them have playoff success? Now we can say yes to that. Sam Laporta was banged up. He came in and played a great game. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and there was even a revenge game by none other than Mr. Josh Reynolds, another Rams reject. So we talk about teams who deserved their outcome. I think the Lions deserved to win this game. The Rams, I don't know if the Rams deserved to lose this game necessarily, but the NFL script was on point. They said, you know what, Jared Goff, you came up, they brought you out to dry in Detroit. You came out, you prevailed, and you beat them head to head when it mattered and coming up victorious.
Yeah, and it was crazy because after the game, Jared Goff said, I didn't know that we had won the game until they sent in the personnel for the kneel down. So after he got that first down, it didn't start to set in, and there were a lot of emotions in this game, especially with how the media treated Jared Goff. I mean, treating this guy like trash, taking a dig at Jared Goff, and then every time Jared Goff has a bad moment or a bad game, the media jumps on him right away. They're like, see, this is why Jared Goff is trash. This is why he's terrible. I'm like, really? No one other than Jared Goff has had a bad moment? Because you guys have been riding Dak Prescott, you guys have been riding Josh Allen, and those guys have plenty of bad moments in NFL games. And then this is another game where the media picked the Rams in this game. I feel like it was majority Rams. They thought that the pressure would get to the Lions, but the Lions have Dan Campbell. They don't have Mike McCarthy. They don't have Mike McDaniels, and Dan Campbell had his guys ready to go in this game. This is the same guy we built our show off of, Dan Campbell being underrated, off of him being the guy. One of our first bets on the show was about Dan Campbell. When you walk through a gym, he's the type of guy to be blasting AC/DC, talking about how he listens to Metallica, talking about the kneecaps. We were like, this guy is awesome. This isn't someone who should be made fun of. This is exactly the guy to turn around Detroit. And then everyone took them until last year. They're like, oh, that's a flicker by the Lions. And then we picked them opening day to beat the Chiefs. No one else picked them opening day to beat the Chiefs. And then also we picked them to go the Super Bowl this year. And then people are finally starting to come around to the Lions, and they're like, yeah, the Lions won. But I mean, it was only by 1 point. It's like, this is the most pressure on them, where you haven't won a playoff game in over 30 years. You haven't won a playoff game, and then it's versus Stafford and the guy that threw Jared Goff to the curb. So if anyone knows how to beat Jared Goff, it's going to be Raheem Morris and the LA Rams. It's like, okay, y'all didn't want to pick the Bengals versus the Bills last year. We got you. Y'all didn't want to pick the Lions versus the Rams this year. Okay, we got you. Y'all didn't want to pick the Bengals to get to the Super Bowl the year they got there. Okay, we got you. Y'all didn't want to pick the Jags over the Chargers. Okay, we got you. You didn't want to pick the Cowboys to lose in the first round. Okay, we got you, because Detroit now has a second home game here, and we've been all over it from the start.
Yeah, and even better now, they face the Bucks, who I think that of the remaining teams in the NFC, they are probably the fourth best team. So I think that they should be favorites. They are currently favorites at home to take on the Bucks. I think that's going to be a great game. And then potentially we have an opportunity where they could host a game in the NFC title game had they beat the Bucks, potentially with the Packers and how well they're playing.
Yeah.
Can they go out there and upset the Niners? I think it's definitely possible. So we could see a scenario where the Lions are hosting at Ford Field the Green Bay Packers with a chance to punch a ticket to the Super Bowl, something that they have never done in history. They haven't won a championship since 1957, since Eisenhower was president.
Since Eisenhower, yeah. And then this is a team that we've been on since day one. Even like through the first bad year, we were on the Lions. We're like, look at just how they're losing these games. It's like a 66-yard field goal. Are you fucking kidding me, Justin Tucker?
Heartbreak.
Heartbreak. It was like heartbreak after heartbreak. And then they started 1-6 last year. And then this year, we knew was the year. If it was any year, it's like, okay, look at their roster top to bottom compared to any other team in the league. Offensively, they match up with any team in the league, and it's like defensively, sure, they have a bad secondary, but they have a good red zone defense. It's a good bend but don't break mentality, so you just can't give up those massive big plays. But Ali McNeil and CJ Gardner-Johnson missed a lot of time this week. They're going to help the Detroit Lions a lot. And then CJ Gardner-Johnson was able to make some plays in this game, and they did just enough to stop the Rams. And the Rams with Stafford, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp, this is like the ultimate kryptonite to a team like the Detroit Lions, who really their problem is their secondary.
Yeah, no, this is, if there was any team that I was the most nervous about them facing, it was the Rams, because of the history, because of how good the Rams have been the last 6 weeks of the season, because you have Matt Stafford there, an old icon in Detroit, a guy who could eventually have a statue for all we know.
Yeah.
Because of how much they love him there. If there was any team I didn't want them to face, it was the Rams. And then proving that they are capable of beating them and taking care of them the way they did, credits to them there. Credits to Dan Campbell with them building that foundation. Credit to Amon-Ra, top 10 wide receiver in the league. Sam Laporta, one of the best tight ends in football. So this is a great win, great morality boost for them. And I think that they are the most dangerous team in the NFC at this point. With the Lions, the 49ers have had 2 weeks off, and then the Packers, I think they're a lot of trouble as well. But the Lions, definitely the most dangerous team now at this point.
Yeah, most dangerous team. They do have to get through Tampa, and we'll get to them, but all the pressure is off of them after that one playoff game. It seemed like they started to get tight in the second half. However, they were able to make that one throw to Amon-Ra. They make it every week in their sleep, and Jared Goff was able to ice the game. So credit to the Lions. And then Rams, you had a great season. Credit to them for showing up. It just wasn't your time this year. It was the Lions' time this year. They won the playoff game. They're getting it done, and it's kind of I don't know, a changing of the guard that we've seen the past few weeks where you see someone like Jordan Love beating the Cowboys, getting that old guard out of the way, taking on the reins. And then you see someone like Jared Goff going out there beating Matthew Stafford, kind of taking the reins back for the new guard. CJ Stroud beating the Joe Flacco led Browns, changing the power in the AFC there. And then all over the league, you're seeing these young quarterbacks taking over. And this was the first playoff run without Peyton Manning, without Tom Brady, without Aaron Rodgers. We don't have Ben Roethlisberger here, and we don't have Russell Wilson or Drew Brees in the playoffs. However, you look at the second round matchups in the divisional round, it's absolutely crazy. And the reason why we got here is because we're getting round two of Mahomes and Allen, with Josh Allen beating the Pittsburgh Steelers. They went up 21-0 in this game. It was pretty much over from there. We thought the Bills would cover the spread. However, we thought there was going to be 3 feet of snow in this game. They ended up moving it. But the Bills go out there. It was a dominant performance. You really saw Josh Allen turn on the Jets. He wasn't trying to do too much versus this game because the Steelers quarterback was, Mason Rudolph, taking on the Buffalo Bills, and he showed up like Mason Rudolph. He wasn't the guy who showed up in the past few weeks, who was one of the best quarterbacks in the league stats-wise. That's why stats do lie to you, because anytime someone says stats don't lie, they are lying to you about how stats do lie. They're just using it because they want to use a specific stat for their argument, or else they can't possibly have an eye test or watch any other NFL games, because if they did, they wouldn't tell you that Mason Rudolph should be starting over Kenny Pickett in this game.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to give flowers to Josh Allen because he had a fantastic game. And this is the Josh Allen that I want to see in the playoffs, because we saw last year he had a really brutal game against the Dolphins with Skylar Thompson. And then he had that game against the Bengals where it just was not pretty from the start in that snow game. We've seen scenarios with Josh Allen before, whether it was the run 2 years prior with that 13-second game, the greatest playoff game we've been able to witness together. His game against the Patriots that same year was immaculate as well. I much rather would see a Josh Allen playoff run like 2021 than I would see the year prior. And if this is the year that he has that run, I'm here for it. He had 4 total touchdowns. He had this massive 52-yard run, which I believe is the biggest quarterback run touchdown in NFL history in the playoffs now, or at least in the top 3 there. So great run there. Josh Allen had a great game. We talk about Josh Allen a lot on the show, and sometimes not always in the great light, because he is one of those top 5 quarterbacks who is the most frustrating, especially for me, and I'm sure you agree. Where you have Patrick Mahomes, he continuously shows greatness week in and week out. Lamar Jackson, same idea. CJ Stroud of late. Joe Burrow. But Josh Allen's one of those guys where he can be very erratic. He can have a lot of touchdowns, but also have a lot of turnovers. But when he doesn't turn the ball over, Josh Allen could very well be Jesus Christ himself. He could very well be God. Call me a Christian in this case. I think that this was a great game. At the same time, a lot of the media, we already know where this is going. They're going to pick them to win the Super Bowl, if not make it to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I do want to, as much as I just called him Jesus Christ and I did call him God, let's reel back for a second and remember that he did beat Mason Rudolph. So I do want to preface that.
Yeah.
When we go to preview the Bills and Chiefs game and any future Bills games this coming playoffs, I like the Bills game. I do like how they played, but they beat the Steelers, who many people picked as the worst team entering the playoffs.
Yeah, they were the worst team entering the playoffs, and they were without TJ Watt. And I want to see how the Steelers would respond this time without TJ Watt. I'm like, how is this team so bad without TJ Watt? It's like inexplicably bad. It's like, why does your offense forget how to get the ball to George Pickens? Well, how do you forget how to run the ball with Najee Harris, Jalen Warren? How do you forget how to get the ball to Pat Freiermuth and Deontay Johnson? Just because TJ Watt isn't there. And it seemed like with the Steelers, they came out pretty low energy. They had some missed opportunities in this game where they had a drive where they could have cut it to 14-7. However, they end up turning the ball over on that drive. Mason Rudolph throws an interception, and then it was pretty much all downhill from there. However, the Bills did let them stay in this game, and it was a little bit closer than I feel like most Bills fans would have liked. But this is also a Josh Allen led team. He didn't have the most passing yards, but he did what he needed to do to get it done. And this is what we've been screaming about is like, Josh Allen, you don't need to force the ball every single time. You don't need to throw these careless interceptions. You can just hit Dawson Knox over here, hit Dalton Kincaid over there. And the Bills were the first team in playoff history to have two tight ends score in the first quarter of an NFL playoff game. So that's cool, I guess, with Josh Allen's run. But the Bills just look like the better team. Mike Tomlin looked like a coach who had lost to Tim Tebow in the playoffs. He looked like a coach who had lost to Blake Bortles in the playoffs before. And he looks like someone who every time he went up against a Manning, his defense would get cooked. Every time he went up against a Brady, his defense would get cooked, especially after Troy Polamalu. They haven't been able to have that same level of Pittsburgh defense without James Harrison, without Troy Polamalu, Ryan Clark, Casey Hampton, all of those guys. And really, what came from this game, the Bills had the most impressive victory going up against the worst opponent in the playoffs. But it's like Mike Tomlin is how much longer does he want to do this? Because every year, sure, you have a winning season, but do you really just want to have a winning season or do you want to compete for a Super Bowl? Because the Steelers have not been close to that in a very long time. Every time Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown were there to make a push, one of them would come up with an injury, or Antonio Brown would go crazy, run off the field with his shirt off. He would maybe show up to training camp in a hot air balloon there. He would freeze his feet. He would have a bad influence on Juju. And then you have this George Pickens drama. And then they broached the question to him after the game and then just walked off.
Yeah. And you know what? The Steelers aren't really in a position where they can talk about, not have questions after the game
Yeah.
following a playoff loss, because this is now their sixth consecutive playoff loss. This is a Steelers franchise that's much like the Packers, where continued storied history, historically always good. They were good in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and you get the idea. And now, really, the last decade, I think, is when you can really draw the line in the sand. It's been since you saw these greats of the 2000s retire, Polamalu, James Harrison, and all the other guys that were there. And then since then, you've had good teams. You've had Le'Veon, you've had Antonio Brown, all these other great talents there. And what has it amounted to? It's been whether you're the one seed or the two seed, just losing in the first round. And that's what it's been. And it hasn't been to these great talents. It's been to, Tim Tebow. It's been to Blake Bortles, as everyone you mentioned there. And these losses, to some extent, have been embarrassing as well, because the Steelers team, historically, not the situation in this game. This game, the Bills should have won. But
Yeah.
in other games in the past, these are times where you're favorited, or sometimes even heavily favored in these games, and you just flat out embarrass yourself at this point. So, Mike Tomlin, you have the right to have these questions asked for you. And you have a question to ask yourself: is it time for me to step away from Pittsburgh? We've seen Pete Carroll leave this week from Seattle. We've seen Bill Belichick step away. We've seen in college Nick Saban step away.
Yeah.
And these are all guys that were there for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, step away from the limelight because it's been long enough where it's been kind of low the last couple of years. Maybe it's time to step away, take a year off, reinvent yourself, and come back to a
Yeah.
new situation.
Yeah, come back to a newer situation. And what I will say is Bill Belichick is probably not the best fit for Dallas, especially with what Bill Belichick and Jerry Jones wants. You know who is? Mike Tomlin. You know who, like the rah rah guy, someone I can be friends with, someone who every player wants to coach with, someone who will get out coached in every single big game and be a disappointment in the playoffs when he has a stacked roster. It's like all of those qualities you can attribute to Mike Tomlin as the perfect heir to Mike McCarthy if the Cowboys decide to move on from him. So it's like, on one hand, you could be like, okay, maybe the Cowboys give Mike McCarthy another shot because Jerry Jones is feeling generous. And then because he knows Mike Tomlin has 1 year left on his deal. So it's like, you want to talk about a guy who can install some toughness. And then you also see people like Mike Vrabel, who has always felt like with his roster overachieved. Feels like Mike Tomlin defensively, you're a defensive guy, but your defense is always underachieved to the level of talent that you have on the field. And you couldn't even make the Bills uncomfortable in this game with all pro talent all over your roster.
Yeah, and I think I think they put up about as much of a fight as they could have in this game overall, just with what they had going against them with Mason Rudolph. But at the end of the day, like, you just It didn't really felt at any point that the Bills didn't have control,
Yeah.
and I think that trickled in there. We talk about Mike Tomlin potentially leaving Pittsburgh, and I think you mentioning Mike Vrabel is fascinating to me because Mike Vrabel would be somebody who could step in for Pittsburgh. I don't think that it's an ideal situation for him necessarily, as he's probably going to want GM powers, but someone who did play for Pittsburgh at some point,
Yeah.
stepping in, playing for them, I think that defense would stay just about as good as it is now. And then their offense, I mean, I think he should be able to hire offensive coordinators better than Mike Tomlin because Mike Tomlin's been pretty egregious historically.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin hasn't had the best offensive coordinators. And then, with all that being said about the Steelers, the reason why we get down on the Bills so time is not necessarily because we don't like the Bills. It's just because the media wildly overrates them. And what I mean by that is we talked about the Cowboys, how they're the number 2 contender next to the 49ers. Well, next to the Ravens, most people have the Buffalo Bills as the number 2 contender. And that was with the Miami Dolphins win that they were prefacing it. And I was like, I just saw Josh Allen have 3 turnovers in that game, and you won the game on a punt return, and you played Tua to a stalemate, and it was 14-14 if you just go based off of offenses. And I'm supposed to believe that that team is the number 2 contender in the AFC. I was like, no way. And then people freak out when you're like, yeah, the media overrates them, and I don't have that much value in the Bills here. So after this game, do you have more value in them going up against the Chiefs and their defense than you have in years past?
I do because I know that the way the Bills play the Chiefs, this is a team that, they've gone up against each other now. This will be time number 6 now. So in the regular season, Josh Allen owns them, and then he has the 2 playoff losses. But in those playoff losses, you take out that AFC title game where he gets annihilated. That other game could have easily gone any other way. I think this time around, I have more optimism in the Bills because of where the Chiefs are. You have all the drop issues with the receivers. Travis Kelce is not looking the same. The last time they faced each other, we saw Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce have a big impact on that game. Travis Kelce does not look the same as he did then, and then obviously Tyreek Hill is gone. So I have faith in the Bills,
Yeah.
and I have faith in Josh Allen to step up in that game. The thing that's always going to be in the mix there for me is Patrick Mahomes
Right.
and his ability to elevate his game in the playoffs. This is going to be a historic matchup. This is going to be a great game to recap, but
Yeah.
I have faith in the Bills because of where the Chiefs are at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the historic matchup is really that you're missing, and you're subtracting in this matchup. It's going to be 4 touchdowns that are going to be missing from that game. And how will the Buffalo Bills replace that?
How will the Bills replace the touchdowns?
Yeah, Gabe Davis had 4 touchdowns when they played the Chiefs. It's like, I know he's a nemesis of the show, but that is the player who allowed them to cook the Chiefs in Kansas City. So that'll be interesting to see play out.
Yeah, if it's not Gabe Davis, who else is on that team that's a third string that elevates into this premier wide receiver? Maybe it's Shakir. Maybe Shakir has that, Shakira level run. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Dalton Kincaid who comes out, or maybe James Cook has a James Cook day. Who knows? It's gonna have to be one of those guys because I don't know if it's not Gabe Davis. It's not gonna be Stephon Diggs apparently.
Yeah, if it's not Gabe Davis, we'll see who it'll be, especially with L'Jarius Sneed going up against Stephon Diggs. Chiefs were able to slow down Tyreek Hill, but I'm excited for that matchup, especially for when we preview it. And then we have, last but not least, something else we've been saying on the show, I don't know, for the past 2-3 months here. Another game, even though we went over everything else we got right, how we only missed 1 pick. I only missed 1 pick. You got every other pick right. How we predicted every single matchup in the NFC. Well, this was a matchup we predicted, and I said the Philadelphia Eagles look like that Steelers team who started undefeated and proceeded to lose every single game and got defeated by one Baker Mayfield in 2019, I believe, that the Cleveland Browns beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'll be like, it is going to be in blowout fashion. The Eagles are going to go to Tampa, but to do this, I mean, are you kidding me? So Jalen Carter was supposed to be the best defensive player in the draft. Where did he go? He's disappeared this season. He looks like he's hiding. He looks like he doesn't want to play football. He looks like he doesn't want to be a star in the NFL because he's not jumping off anyone's screen. They're not calling his name once during the rest of these games. Fletcher Cox is someone who is a fossil on this team. And then everyone was talking about Philadelphia, Darius Slay. You've been talking about Darius Slay. I was like, Darius Slay is a little bit too old. James Bradbury is a little bit older. And with the Philadelphia Eagles, you lost two coordinators. You lost Murphy and Practical Jokers and Shane Steichen, who was at one point a Coach of the Year candidate. And then Nick Sirianni didn't really know what to do with this team. It seemed like Jason Kelce, the fact that he made it public that he was planning on retiring, killed this team, because this entire Philadelphia Eagles team looked like they were retiring. You had Jalen Hurts looking like he was playing like 2022 Russell Wilson about to retire. You had James Bradbury and Darius Slay who couldn't cover anyone. No one on that team could tackle. They couldn't tackle a nursing home outside playing ultimate frisbee in their wheelchairs. That's how inept this team was. You couldn't catch your grandma going down the hill in a wheelchair if her life depended on it, and everyone was just running free open. As soon as they get the ball, they were just running wide open. The first touchdown the Tampa Bay Buccaneers got, how was that a touchdown? Come on. I mean, any other NFL defense would have figured that out. And then, okay, this is how smart Todd Bowles is. He's like, I'm going to blitz every single play. The Buccaneers had like 10 plays that they didn't blitz Jalen Hurts. Oh, I don't know. Maybe we get someone open, because every time you blitz 6 players, there should be someone open on the field, especially when Devontae Smith is going crazy. You have Dallas Goedert on that team, and then you have other receivers who should have chemistry with Jalen Hurts, but you guys couldn't figure out the same blitz being thrown at you over and over again. Yeah, this was a team that looked like everyone was about to retire. No, Jason Kelce was the only one who's going to retire, and I know Jalen Hurts was probably dealing with an injury, but if you're dealing with an injury, well, don't put yourself out there for criticism, because you didn't have any interceptions, but you missed some opportunities in this game, and it was close in this game. At one point, it was 9-16. Baker Mayfield was 11 for 24 at one point in this game, ended up finishing above 50% completions, but Baker wasn't having a good first half. Mike Evans was dropping passes, and the game was closer than it should have been. They had an opportunity to win the game in the first half, and then it just got out of control. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers did what we thought they were going to do. Defensively, they showed up, and this is a team that last year they had a lot of injuries. They were banged up, and it was Tom Brady's last year, and he had unretired, so he was already in that retirement mode a little bit. They lose to the Dallas Cowboys. They get healthier this year, though. They had won the last 2 division championships, and they're like, okay, not much has changed on this team that won the Super Bowl, except for the quarterback at this point. Their offensive line is better. You could argue they have a better tight end. Rachaad White is playing well. Chase Edmonds showed up in this game. Chris Godwin had a really good game. Mike Evans had a bad first half, but showed up in the second half. But it's like, we pretty much still have the same defense that won us the Super Bowl and shut down Patrick Mahomes and held him to 9 points.
Yeah, no, honestly, that was my big takeaway from it as well. It was the Eagles team that just looked dead from the start. And this is how they've looked the last half of the season, which is why they ended on the worst top 5 list. The inaugural end of the season bottom 5 was, I don't know what changed after the Chiefs game, but everything has come crashing down ever since they lost to that Bills game in overtime. It's been a sinking ship, and part of it could be Jalen Hurts' health, but I feel like that doesn't excuse how the defense has played over the last 7 weeks and how much they've crumbled from there. It doesn't make for the sense that it just feels like the entire team just lost all energy at some point in the season. And then going into this game, it's like, this is still a playoff game. This is still win or go home. And it felt like everybody on the Eagles just wanted to go home and just write a new ship. Maybe they had lost faith in Sirianni, which the media definitely wants to see Sirianni gone at this point. And I guess there's blame to be there for Sirianni, no doubt about it. But this is a game where, out of all the teams that we saw this week, all these teams, I feel like the Eagles looked the most dead on arrival. And even with the Cowboys, you can give credit to the Packers and how much they really pressed onto the gas. With the Dolphins, you can say, well, they did face the defending champions. Okay, maybe there's some merit there. But for the Eagles, a team that just made the Super Bowl, a team that has one of the best records over the last 3 years, a team that has talent everywhere, there's no excuse for them to go out there and play as poorly as they did. I give credit to the Bucks. The Bucks had a great game plan for them. They took care of business. Baker Mayfield winning that playoff game, being a hero in Tampa Bay now, and having a great comeback season. But for the Eagles, like you can't point to just one person. It's
Yeah.
been a whole team disappointment at this point, and how much they've crumbled. They started off 10-1, and then they end the season wild card round on the road in Tampa Bay against a team that was 9-8 in the season and clinched the final week of the season. It's like there's really no excuse for what happened to the Eagles.
Yeah, and the last time we saw a fall off like this was with that Steelers team that I compared the Eagles to. I'm like, my only trepidation with that was Ben Roethlisberger was old, didn't have that many great wide receivers on the team at the time. So I'm like, okay, with Ben Roethlisberger going through some Antonio Brown drama at that time, he's getting older. He didn't really have the arm, and there's a lot of fluky plays that happen with the high snap in that game, and then some special teams that went the Cleveland Browns way. That was just an absolute onslaught. And then with Jalen Hurts, though, I'm like, well, he should play better than 37-year-old Ben Roethlisberger. Like, you would think he would be better than a 40-year-old quarterback, but he wasn't. I think part of it was injury, and I do think if AJ Brown was himself and played in this game, it would have been a lot closer. However, if you're the Philadelphia Eagles and you're Nick Sirianni, he's known for being this ultimate motivator, talking about roots and how we need to grow them so we have a strong foundation. But the foundation of this game was you can't stop anyone in the secondary, which materialized itself with Kyler Murray cooking you. How you couldn't stop Tommy Cutlets and Tyrod Taylor. They cut you up. You couldn't stop Jalen Hyatt and Wandell Robinson. And then in this game, I'm like, what are they going to do with Baker Mayfield, Chris Godwin, and Mike Evans and Cade Otton? And then that was exactly the case in this game where your defense falls off completely. Everyone on that team looked old, and it looked like the war of attrition. They just lost. They're like, okay, we go out there, beat the Buffalo Bills, beat the Kansas City Chiefs on last winning game minute drives, and then you get blown out by the 49ers. You're like, oh, at home, we lost that badly. Then you lose to the Cowboys, and the Philadelphia Eagles know how fraudulent the Cowboys are. So that probably had to be pretty demoralizing for them. But it comes down to the offensive line couldn't open up any run holes, and they weren't able to run the ball. The first half, they only ran it with D Swift 5 times. And they were trying to do a lot of screens to create a run game there, but it was just an absolute disaster from start to finish. And you talk about the defense. Every single week, the Philadelphia Eagles defense have a problem. You're like, I don't know what it is. And every single week, I tell you, the problem is Matt Patricia. Who on their right mind would give Coach Pencil, who was only good under Bill Belichick, crazy, the greatest defensive mind in NFL history. Who would have thought that after going to Detroit, ruining their franchise, that he could come to Philadelphia and he wouldn't absolutely ruin their franchise? So when you say, oh, what's wrong with their defense? Like, it's Matt Patricia. And it's not even a discussion.
No, Matt Patricia, or should I say Coach Pencil, is a disease to anybody on the defensive side of the ball. Even when the Patriots had Matt Patricia, their defense was not nearly as good as it was capable of in years past. So Matt Patricia, he's the Adam Gase of defense at this point. Anything that is good about that defense is going to molder and crumble into ultimate bits. And that's exactly what happened with Matt Patricia in Detroit. And this is exactly what happened to him in Philadelphia. And ultimately, even in New England, we saw him as an offensive coordinator last time we saw him in New England.
Yeah.
Disaster there. So Matt Patricia, go to college or go to your local high school or go somewhere, go to the UFL. I'm sure the UFL would love you with now the merger of the XFL and USFL. Go there. Please do not step foot on an NFL football field again as a head coach or offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. Whoever in their right mind hires you should be immediately sent to rehab because they're clearly on drugs at this point.
Yeah.
So that Eagles team, they got exactly what they deserved. We talk about all the teams that won, they deserve it. Teams that lost, they deserve it. This is the hand that they've been dealt.
Yeah.
Giving Matt Patricia defensive play calling abilities. Don't know why he did that. And also not filling in. I know losing Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon is a tall task to fill, but you missed everything when it comes to finding that replacement. You couldn't have found a worse replacement on defense. And then offensively, the guy just wasn't the guy. At the end of it, he'll probably be let go. But
That shouldn't matter though, because Nick Sirianni's an offensive guy. Like the
right,
reason why defensive head coaches are so toxic in the NFL these days is because what happens when when someone like D'Amico Ryans brings in someone like Bobby Slowick for a CJ Stroud and Bobby Slowick leaves, D'Amico Ryans is not an offensive guy, and then you have trouble replacing a coordinator with Bill Belichick, with Mike Vrabel. You're like, okay, understandable. But when you're the offensive guy, you're the one drawing up the schemes. It should be your plan. You're the one who has to motivate the team and they look dead. You didn't show them Rocky enough times. You didn't say, hey, we're going to hike up mountains in Russia. You didn't go out there and say, Jalen Hurts, you're playing terrible right now. You didn't say, hey, we need more pass protection and more run holes on offense right now. You didn't say we need to figure out how to get D Swift involved and fix the run game in the last few weeks. You didn't fire Matt Patricia. You're the one who gave him the play calling ability. At some point, we can't be like, oh, offensive coordinator is gone. Yes, if it's a defensive head coach, but Nick Sirianni is not. He was brought there because he is a offensive wizard. And then he went there. He's been a Chargers offensive coordinator. Okay. And then he was with the Indianapolis Colts under Frank Reich when they had, I believe it was Philip Rivers' season, which
yeah,
wasn't the best year, and they had a chance to beat the Bills in the playoffs that year. He comes over, and then as soon as Shane Steichen leaves, the offense takes a step back, and you're like, you know what? They need some more play calling like they have in Philadelphia because they can actually run the ball in Indianapolis. And then the defense, you're like, what are they missing? Like, well, they play hard in Arizona and they're undermanned, but the scheme's there, the motivation is there. You can't just lose two coordinators and be completely undressed as a head coach. And then you just paid Jalen Hurts. So you need him to get over the hump. And this was happening when you had AJ Brown and Devontae Smith still on the field. It's like you shouldn't go from a Super Bowl contender to this bad unless everyone on your defense got old, which happened, but you still have players like Jalen Carter and Nakobe Dean who you drafted for this moment to show up, and they haven't. Where's
yeah,
Jordan Davis?
yeah. All these guys didn't show up, and even offensively, I mean, I know Jalen Hurts is banged up, but you have talent. You have D Swift. You have Dallas Goddard. You have Devontae Smith, and ultimately, the sad thing about this Eagles team, the most of it all, is we were so optimistic about them last year and how great they were and making it to the Super Bowl, but now we look at them 1 year later, losing in the playoffs, crumbling the way they did the last half of the season. And now you're going to see Jason Kelsey retire. You're going to see Fletcher Cox retire. You're going to see some of these guys who they brought in leave at this point. AJ Brown is unhappy. And it seems like it's a crumbling ship now for the Eagles, where you still have the Cowboys in that division. Although they are not playoff contenders, they are still regular season contenders, and they'll be in the mix there. The Commanders have a new regime. We'll see how they turn things around. But things are getting very ugly for the Eagles very fast. And I worry that they're going to really crumble next year with all those guys who they're going to end up losing eventually.
Yeah, they have to hit on their draft, but next year is going to be tough, especially if AJ Brown is out. And then he had a post where he was like, oh, if you throw another interception, I don't want to hear another motivational quote on your Instagram, and I'll be playing with number 4 in Dallas next year. I'm like, AJ Brown, do you really want to play with Dak Prescott over Jalen Hurts? First of all, they're not going to trade you in division. And if they did, Dak Prescott is not better than Jalen Hurts.
Mm.
Jalen Hurts has been to a Super Bowl. The first time he had a Super Bowl roster, he got you there. You're within one possession of being the Kansas City Chiefs. Dak Prescott has not sniffed an NFC championship game. Dak Prescott lost to Brock Purdy. It's like, what are you talking about? You want to go play with Dak Prescott in Dallas? Like, sure, go have fun being bounced in the first round. Who you really want to play with is number 7 in Houston, a team who has cap space. They wouldn't be able to have you in Dallas. You know why? They're paying number 4 too much money to have you even on the roster. You know who can afford it? Houston. So if you want to go play somewhere, you want to go compete for a championship, go to the Texans.
Yeah, I'm on board for that. That'd be sick. So now, the Bucks, they get justice for Baker Mayfield, a guy who was battered around, getting that playoff victory against the lowly Eagles. We saw the Bills, Josh Allen going into Superman form, the Chiefs beating up against the lowly Dolphins. We saw the Lions seek vengeance with the playoff
Yeah.
win in 32 years. The Texans submitting themselves as the top of the AFC. All these great things that happened. The Packers upsetting the Cowboys. You have been previewed. We saw greatness this weekend, and we're only going to continue to see greatness in the divisional round.
Yeah, divisional round is going to be crazy. I'm looking forward to previewing all of these matchups. So we're on the road to 500 subs here. Almost at that mark, should be there at the end of the week. So make sure you subscribe at Brick Nation Media on YouTube. Follow us at the Brickyard Podcast on social. Most importantly, stay brick.
Brick.